All right, we're doing just the personality, and we're only going to get maybe halfway through that tonight, and that's all we're going to do. You're going to have to do it on your own if you want more. This is a fact sheet. Pass them out so that everyone gets one.
I was wondering if you could start off with a couple of questions.
Probably not.
Why not?
Because I don't want the class to be runaway. Because it's a long class tonight. I have 9 pages of notes, and that's a long class.
Well, I read your description, or a written description of the Jay Gould personality. I had a couple of questions on what you said in that.
Yes.
I kind of want to know, you said Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, is a lover of truth and honesty, but because it does not have a good deal at stake in either, it can in its neutrality, its switchable ways. Okay, well, why doesn't it have a good deal of stake in either?
Because it doesn't have stake with anything. It's a very neutral planet.
Oh, because I don't know, I thought it's trying Saturn.
It doesn't have any hawks on anything. All right. This is the brief for Helen Keller. It's what we're doing is parallel in the brief to what we do in the class, only what we do in the class is much, much more extensive and of a totally different kind of thing.
Oh, it's just because of Gemini? Is that's what you say?
It's just because of Mercury.
Oh. Okay.
That's the nature of Mercury. It doesn't want to be partisan. It doesn't want to be attached to anything.
Okay, and the other question is, why would you consider this Saturn-Mercury trying to be malefic? Because it seems like it's quite a wonderful tool. And
Well, it's a wonderful tool, but
because he's using it for evil ways?
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Because the Saturn has so much else about it that is so malevolent that it just takes over the trine and turns it into something negative. I've even seen it happen in charts that are much more benign, that the Saturn has, that trine does not always work out as a benefic trine.
I know this study had Saturn opposite Mars. Is that part of it being...
No, I won't go any further with that. I will not go any further. We'll have a runaway class, and I don't want that. I have certain things I'm trying to get across, and those things will come up, but not now.
I was just wondering how you can tell whether a trine is malefic.
Observation and intuition.
Is it generally malefic if it's like, one of the malefic
observation and intuition.
Okay. I would say opposition is definitely difficult.
Okay. Thank you, Richard.
All right. We're talking about Helen Keller. And anytime you mention the name Helen Keller, what you hear is, oh, she was the deaf-blind little girl who accomplished so much. That was very true in her time. Everybody made a big fuss over her. And even though she liked having the attention showered on her, and it gave her opportunities to meet many very great and famous people, she wasn't completely happy with the situation. She didn't like to be defined to the world on the basis of her handicap. A lot of people are like that. They don't want to be defined by their handicaps. She wanted to be loved for herself, for who she was and what she did. And that's like all of us. Well, we all feel that way. But especially it's the common complaint of handicapped people. It's even the complaint of very high achievers. They are seen in terms of their phenomenal achievements, but they aren't seen for themselves. This is part of the destiny lesson that we have to go through. There is not always an integral connection between the doer and what is done. In her case, the handicap was very extreme. if Emerson is true when he says a sick man is a sinner found out, then this would be having your entire sin, your entire condition out there for the world in a gross exhibition. Like having all of your dirty laundry aired out for the whole world and even having it publicized. Most, I think, people who are psychologically healthy and not exhibitionists like I am don't like to talk about their illnesses. What she did as a human being was remarkable. She herself is who did it. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to introduce the subject with a respectfulness, because that's the way we're going to work our way into the personality. When we worked with Jay Gould last time, we worked our way into the personality using a different vehicle. We are again looking only at the outer personality, only at the things that you have in your fact sheet that are relevant, and to the degree that they're relevant. We're going to try and be very accurate with that. We're not going to say everything I could say. We're not going to say everything I want to say, even about the personality. I think this time I got close to 40%. And as we go on, that percentage will drop. That I'll get less and less said compared to what I want to say. Yes, she is a whole. We are all wholes, but we're not talking about the whole character. We'll only do that at the very end when we summarize, when we put together all of the different facets, the personality, the emotionality, the mentality, and the spiritual individuality. That's why the summary at the end is extremely important. But for now, we have to specialize because this is meant to be a fairly technical course. And we're going to look at specific details and try to understand some things. So, the first question one would want to ask to get at the personality through her condition would be, what in this horoscope could indicate deaf blindness? When we do that, we run into all kinds of problems of ethics and judgment. The main one, for now anyway, is the problem of generalization. We've all seen those kinds of simplistic books that correspond various conditions with various attitudes. There will be a one-liner that says, idiocy means sexual excess in a past life. And it'll go on to some other condition and it'll be one-liners. Now, these simplistic generalizations are often true, but they are as trite as they are simplistic. Even if they're usually true, that doesn't mean they're always true. Each case, each horoscope has to be seen for itself because each individual is an individual. There are many things that could cause blindness. There are many things that could cause idiocy. So if someone is suffering a condition in order to awaken a given kind of behavior, it would be important for us to give serious consideration to the condition so that we really understand what's going on and not just offer some kind of superficial one-liner. Because that's the kind of thing that happens in classes like this. We're all in this together, and we're all suffering with and for each other. That's what deepens our unity. That's what deepens our love, because we all suffer. Now, all of this is said because there are several astrological signatures in this horoscope that indicate blindness. This horoscope gives us an opportunity to separate some of the wheat from the chaff. Now, there are all sorts of rules that are put forth about past lives and present conditions and astrological signatures for them, but I find it best to just consider it all hearsay, the way hearsay is treated in court. Until we actually see for ourselves, it's going to be hearsay. If you want to read good books on the subject, I would recommend The Web of Destiny by Max Heindel. It shows a lot of connections between past lives and present conditions. If you want to read an autobiographical version, I don't have any copies in the store, but there's a wonderful book called The Wheel of Rebirth by Helen Challoner, in which she looks at a number of her own past lives and how one thing resolved into another and the kind of conditions that came out of them. Now, astrology is not the same as clairvoyance. An astrological analysis of personality must work with more indirect effects. And this is good because most of modern astrology deals only with direct positionings. Such and such planet is in such and such house, and that means this. And the indirect relationships are not often given. So what we're going to do in this, we're going to be dealing with something that is much more complicated. Even though the Helen Keller chart is less complicated than the Gould chart. The analysis of the Helen Keller chart is simpler than the Gould chart. But there are many more indirects that we have to work with. All right. Yeah, look at that. We're 1/9 of the way through already. This might go fast. We're trying to get a feel of the character of the outward personality. Not the whole character, but just the character of the outward personality. We've been saying that over many, many lives, the body takes on a character of its own according to the experiences that it's gone through. So we're trying to see how in her long history of experience of form and of substance, she has brought this personality to ripeness. We're also trying to see how the personality has been brought to this extreme. This deaf-blindness is pretty extreme. So we're going to try and understand what causes deaf-blindness. We're going to talk about a lot of spiritual things as much as astrological. So let's look at the astrological factors for the personality and vision. Scorpio is rising. Mars is very strong, and it has one very strong aspect. There are 4 planets in Mars, including Mars, in fiery signs, which according to astrological tradition, the fire signs have to do with vision, another form of hearsay. And so these are things that we're going to look at with regard to light and vision. Now, if we look at Mars, if we look at Scorpio, and if we look at planets in the fiery signs, if we start out really simply, we want to ask a simple question. From my experience, what do these factors have in common? Scorpio, Mars, fiery signs. for me, when I was doing these notes and I asked myself this question, the first thing that came to mind is they all like motorcycles. And they all like motorcycles much more than any other astrological significators do. Given that Helen Keller probably never rode a motorcycle in her life, that sounds silly. But it's a way to start. If you've ever ridden a motorcycle, you wouldn't say it was silly. Because when you ride a motorcycle, there's a feel of energy and of power, and it's close at hand, and it's under your control, or at least you hope it's under your control, and that's exciting. I had a motorcycle once, and I had a girlfriend at that time that said to me, "You just like the feel of something powerful throbbing between your legs." Was her way of saying it. If we look at this in a broader way, at these characteristics, we get the feeling of a personality that thrills to the expression of energy. There's a strong fixed sign influence here, Scorpio on the ascendant, and a very strong life ruler in Leo, and that shows power as much as energy. It also shows a durable personality. This is not somebody that has a personality that is flimsy. Form and shape and stuff are not just form and shape and stuff. To this kind of personality, they are receptacles or bodies of excited dynamic energy. This is a personality that is alive and knows that it's alive. Scorpio is not usually conformist. It's way too rebellious to be conformist. And the personality, especially in a case like this, when it's augmented by the Leonine influence, this nonconformity gets expressed as individualism. And put together with all of the energy and durability, this is what is often termed rugged individualism. So it is the expression of energy and of power that distinguishes this kind of outer personality. Suppose, for example, Mars would be in Aries, or if the cardinal signs were more influential, this would manifest more as competition. This is not an uncompetitive chart, but the competition is not foremost. When you have the fixed signs, especially Leo and Scorpio, the influence is shifted to something else, the dominance. This is not a personality that just wants to win. It is a personality that wants to dominate. And it wants to stay dominant. Now, before we go any further, we have to note that because we're saying all of these things, it doesn't mean that she's built like a lumberjack, hairy and muscular and all of that. Being dominant, being energetic, being power-oriented does not preclude femininity. But it does preclude a delicate femininity. She's not some kind of femme or something like that. All this means is what we're saying is that the personality would be likely to dominate any setting in which it found itself. So she was much more than just a curiosity or what in baseball terms they call a phenom. There's something pretty substantial about this personality. But the substantiality was not inertial. So it wasn't necessarily a dynamic personality, but her energy, her lust for life, her sexual charisma, her power and dominance could be felt. It was something tangible. I went on the web and I picked up a bunch of pictures of her at different ages of her life. If you want to look at some pictures of her and see what the outer personality looks like, you might find it helpful.
Richard?
Yep.
Just quickly, what is Mars in Leo? I mean, it's not exalted or anything.
No.
Just
We're going to say a little more about that a little bit on down the line. I'm going to talk about that down the line. Yeah. It sounds, I don't mind that. It means that, just pass the whole set around. Everybody gets to look at them and pass them around. There's only one set. Now, in physics, energy is neutral. There isn't such a thing as good energy or bad energy. Energy is energy. And to a large extent, this holds true with spiritual astrology and spiritual psychology. Now, fire signs, which are strong in this chart, don't like dirty personal gossip. They like good, clean expressions of energy. Scorpio can be lurid, but even that is not outside of the principle of energy. Some energy-oriented people like explosions or destruction. Just as an expression of energy. Not necessarily for destruction. They don't identify with destruction. Some do, but usually they just like explosion, energy. But mostly the fire signs and Mars in Scorpio like to use energy to do things. Now, when any part of the character becomes associated with energy, it takes this cleanness that energy has and it makes it part of itself. Thus, if a personality is associated with energy, it likes good, clean feelings of energy. Nobody wants a sputtering motorcycle. They like it all to be just clean that way. Fiery or energetic personalities don't like to function in terms of personal enemies. They like to think in terms of dominance. Doesn't matter that, you don't have to have an enemy. And if there is dominance, it usually isn't with vehemence that's personal, it's just dominance. That's in the ideal. To some extent that carries through in humanity. However, all of us as human beings are fallen. We're imperfect. To some extent, we're sinful. So sometimes we do, in our weakness, identify with functions like energy or with domination. Most often it seems in astrology that the fallen nature is expressed more in terms of ignorance or unawareness. So it's quite common that Scorpio, fire signs, and even Mars and the Sun are so into energy that it is not with full waking consciousness. So there isn't a realization of how dominant that they are. They can wreak all kinds of havoc without knowing what they're doing. Other people might get hurt. They may be harmed, but it isn't by intention and it isn't by foreknowledge. We're talking about a personality or a whole range of personality that is like that. Sometimes, if we identify with energy, it becomes habitual. Then it can become intentional. In such cases, when Scorpio or Aries, and especially Mars, are involved, there may be an immaturity that's born of insecurity, sort of an innocence counterfeited into immaturity, trying to maintain that neutral innocence. When this kind of thing happens, then the energy and dominance become what we know as cruelty. Sometimes such individuals lie to themselves by feigning innocence, and sometimes they say it's just energetic neutrality, but what happens is a need to have the effect of cruelty demonstrated. Scorpio tends to cruelty. Mars, especially in a fiery sign, tends to cruelty. Fire signs tend to cruelty, at least in fallen human beings like we are. Hence, with Helen Keller, we have a personality that is prone to cruelty. Now there is a hearsay tradition in mystical and astrological circles, a tradition that goes back many centuries, that has been stated by individuals, and they seem to be reliable individuals, that one of the reasons for blindness is cruelty. Remember, it's only one reason. This horoscope seems to represent exactly that kind of case. Now, this is a nice thing to say, oh, this is a demonstration of what has been known for a long time. But we're more modern than that, so the question for us arises, what is the connection between cruelty and blindness? I'm not sure that I have a definitive answer or a final answer. As far as I can tell, it has something to do with an elemental nature. Fire, as an element, is always associated with spirit, as opposed to matter or manifest reality. In spirit, there are no limits. In the phenomenal realms, the worlds work through limitation. And moderation within limitation is the only way to really to excel in the material world. Thus, fiery expressions, when they are personalized, are extremist. And as far as the material world is concerned, that's not a good thing. Everything having to do with the personality in this horoscope is extremist. This extremism results in terms of limitation in what in slang is called burnout. And in the case of Helen Keller, it was literal. At 18 months, approximately, he had a fever that was so extreme that delicate nerves involved with both hearing and seeing were irreparably burned out. It could not be restored. So we can see that the cruelty has to do with extremity. It has to do with trying to go beyond the limits of things. Now there's another whole side to this, and the other side to it, there are probably many more sides to it, and that is the corrective or the character corrective side of this. If you think about it, we depend enormously upon sight. We depend upon it to do just about anything and everything. Thus, when a person is blind, that individual is significantly disadvantaged and exceedingly vulnerable. You can't see what's coming at you. Now, the fire signs, as well as being cruel, and as well as identifying with energy and the spirit that is behind energy, tend to be proud. So if someone is proud about their ability to dominate, there's probably a need for humility, to be humbled, to be taken down a peg. So in a case like this, someone is given the antidote to their independent, rugged individualism by having to be vulnerable and dependent on the goodness of others. People who in the formative stage of a character development, they wouldn't even look at people like this, but now they have to depend on the goodness of them. And that's something that's a really corrective factor. When we think about it this way, it brings us deeper into the details of the etiology and the meaning of her blindness. The etiology is how a condition develops, psychological or physical. But before we go that little bit deeper, we have to remind ourselves that we're only referring to the personality at this point, not the whole character. The other facets, such as the individuality, are very different. We're only referring to personality. Looking at the ascendant, Scorpio is a high pride sign. So it likes to hide its pride. It likes to hide everything. Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, is in Leo, and that's a sign of extreme pride. Fiery sign things, the presence of all the things in the fiery sign and other things are indicators of pride in the personality. And when you have one thing after another redundant, that magnifies tendencies exponentially. So what we're trying to say is that this is a high pride personality.
What other
I think I'll pass on that. All of the things that we're talking about with pride explain other things about her early childhood, because the first house and ascendant have to do with the early childhood. She was wild. Even in her education, she didn't want to give up, or she didn't want to give in to anything. When she was a little bitty child, she raged against the darkness, and she raged against the silence. And they never resisted her but she sure resisted them. She would thrash and flail until she was played out, and then she was ready to be tamed.
Is that after 18 months, did you say?
No, between 18 months and 6 years. Before 18 months, the character wasn't much developed. It didn't show much.
Now that her freedom is kind of Scorpio fluid, that's that was the other thing,
But we're coming. We have a long way to go.
That's difficult.
I don't want this to get out of hand.
No.
Mars is in the ninth house. And the ninth house indicates philosophy, religion, or education. Mars there means that it's a religion or a philosophy that's based on action. The high elevation of Mars indicates that she may have been in a high religious position. Pride and elevation and cruelty are not good in religion. Scorpio rising is often a sign of intolerance and prejudice. The indirect influence of Mars in the ninth house indicates that there's probably a good and active intolerance against other religions. The opposition of Pluto to the ascendant redoubles this tendency. It also magnifies the power aspect and the fixity. So more and more things are coming together. In its detriment and in opposition to the ascendant, with Scorpio rising, it brings something of a cold, almost brutal nature that goes a step beyond good, clean, energy, fiery nature. This is a symbol, the Pluto opposition part is a symbol of someone who's dissatisfied with everything in the world. This is a person who is an anti, a rebel, a negative. If you ever saw that film Little Big Man, a contrary is what Pluto opposite the ascendant is like. Somebody that's impossible to please. Now, if we take just this aspect alone, it's not a very pretty picture to look at. Question I ask myself is this the picture of a dissatisfied bishop, dissatisfied with the position of power that happens to be an inquisitor? It's possible. It has that kind of a feel to it. And the inquisitors were known for blinding people and doing things like that. If indeed it was somebody who was actively cruel and projectively cruel from a high position, it wasn't only just physical cruelty or physical pain. Mars forms a square, pretty strong square, not super strong, with Neptune. And that brings out another dimension to it. It brings out a psychological dimension and a more spiritual dimension. Not religious, but spiritual. One of the interpretations that seems to fit in with everything that we've looked at is psychological cruelty. Scorpio rising is also prone to psychological cruelty. Now, when you think of psychology, you think of someone trying to mentally solve the psyche of another and then teasing and torturing them. But that's not what we have described here. What we have described here is much more energetic. we have here is something like one animal fighting with another animal, and in the grappling, almost cunningly, just by the feel of the energy, they sense the weakness in the body and soul of another. And they know how to take advantage of that. It's like what happens in wrestling matches. So this is not a deliberating kind of thing. It's something that much more resembles animal cunning. In this life, she did not undergo psychological torture. Though she did inflict some unconsciously, she did feel tortured by her condition. She was not patient, despite all of the fixed sign things. She was often inclined to go into furies. There's another Mars-Neptune thing. And in cases when she did, it was like she felt tortured by life. She felt tortured by circumstances. If she did administer pain to others, it was vehement, clean, from the excess of her personality. Under this thesis, or looking at it this way, one would expect that she did not have a nemesis or a personal enemy or a torturer in this life. And that was true. Pluto notwithstanding, that's not enough to represent, too much negation to it for it to represent an enemy. Now we have to take a big breath, and we have to make a huge correction. Now, we've been using the very interesting and engaging disability that she has as a means to work ourselves into a feel and an understanding of the personality. It's work. We have some understanding of it. There's a great danger in doing what we're doing. A very serious disability or a handicap is likely to be an expression of a serious character flaw that resulted in many misdeeds that produced the condition. If the character flaw were not serious and expressions did not exist, there wouldn't be any handicap. However, if we focus too much on that alone, we are likely to have a negative picture of the personality. A negative pictured personality that may not be accurate. And for us, accuracy is very important. Most people are basically good people, despite having a few flaws. They're all from God, they're all of the spiritual divine origin, and they all have an extremely long evolution behind them that results in the perfection that they have. You know, all of the functions of the body work exceptionally well. That's millions of years of evolution, so there is perfection there. Even a serious handicap and the attitudes that produced it may be just a bump in the road. It may be local to just several incarnations. So we need to ask ourselves a few more questions than the question of what causes deaf blindness. First and foremost among them are what are the good features in this personality? Are they weaker or stronger than the bad features? And is there an interaction in the personality between the good features and the bad features? Looking at Pluto, we see that it forms an aspect beyond the opposition to the ascendant. It forms the sextile to Mercury. That's likely to be a very positive thing. It's likely to be a benefic thing. If we look at Mars, looking at our fact sheet, which I don't have out right here before me, which I should. If we look at Mars, beyond the opposition, beyond the square to Neptune, it forms a trine to Jupiter. And that trine to Jupiter is much stronger than the square to Neptune. So from all of this we can say that the benefic qualities are likely to be decidedly stronger than the malefic. The reason we say that they're more likely is that nothing is certain when we have free will, and all human beings have free will, and that's not shown in the horoscope. Sometimes we are surprised when a seemingly innocuous horoscope results in horrible circumstances because the individual chooses to make it that way, even if the tendency is not that strong. Nonetheless, there were more likely to be more positive deeds than destructive deeds that came from this personality. And so the past was probably emphatically good. A few minutes ago, we spoke of her intense pride. Now, pride is one of those qualities that is like energy. It's not outright good. It's not outright bad. Scorpio rising can, doesn't necessarily have to, can mean that a person is spitefully self-destructive. That is, it'll harm its person before somebody else can harm it. However, Scorpio rising can just as easily mean a negativity that would not stoop to anything mean or base. Mars in Leo, benignly aspected, brings a strength to the character that she won't give in. And won't give in to something base. That's the queen pride of the fiery signs. So there's something extremely solid, substantial, and very respectable in the character. She's very likely to be demanding of herself personally, and she will not give up. It is not often that a weak personality is charismatic. If somebody's charismatic, they're usually a strong kind of character. Scorpio, looking at the world in general, is one of the signs that is associated with healing and medicine. All of the watery signs are. Healing and medicine are redemptive activities. So Scorpio can be as redemptive as it can be destructive. In the character, redemption represented by Scorpio is regeneration. The principles that are in Scorpio regenerate by reducing things to their principles or their primordial state and then rebuilding or remodeling or regenerating them. This is the sign of the phoenix that rises out of its own ashes. It transforms itself. Alchemy, with the whole idea of reducing base metals to their essential oils and then transferring all of the essential oils to gold, is very much a scorpionic activity. If one wished to redeem or regenerate a personality from a questionable state, there could be no better sign for doing that rising than Scorpio. So we can see the handicaps as a redemptive reduction, where she is reduced to a state of humility and then has to rebuild from that. Now Mars is exceptionally strong in this horoscope. This is why the estimation system is so important. Mars is almost twice as strong as the second planet, and is many times stronger than some of the other planets. So we can see that in this, activity is going to predominate in everything else as far as redemption is concerned. Mars being in Leo is extremely positive. So she's not likely to absorb herself in guilt. Maybe she did cruel things in the past. Maybe she made great mistakes. But having Mars that strong and having it in Leo shows that she's not going to be a guilt-ridden kind of person. And that was true to her life. If you read her autobiography, which is a really sweet book, and if you read the reports of others, she was not a guilt-absorbed person. She was very regenerative. That was her whole life. So Mars is the primary engine of regeneration in this personality. Usually, this means a regeneration that is active and energetic, and it comes about through deeds. Because Mars is so strong in this horoscope, it supersedes everything else. So this makes it a very unusual life, because almost everyone else has an activity or a duty to others or to the world, to their career, to their family, to their art. She doesn't have that. That may be another part of the denial that comes from Pluto opposite the ascendant. This is almost like saying that not only is she made weak and vulnerable, it is like she is barred from initiating relations with others. This gives new meaning to the bull formation that's on the west side with all the planets on the west side of the horoscope. It's like saying all of her direct activities and most of her indirect activities are initiated by others. So as active as she is and having this strong desire to dominate and to do, she is dependent on others to initiate the activity. That has to be extremely hard for someone with such a strong pride to be at the mercy of others. She is a center of attention, but she has only this regenerative work to do, and even in that she's dependent on others. This almost sounds like someone brings out another facet of the personality. It sounds like someone who didn't pay attention to personal needs, even though highly independent, didn't pay attention to it. All of this has very high likelihood. The strongest regenerative tool is represented by the Mars trine Jupiter. So let's look at that a little bit. I want to do more of these aspect analysis, and I think we'll have enough time to do it. So we have Mars trine Jupiter. Mars is number 1, and it has a number quality of 222, but the percentage is what counts. It's 22% of all the planetary strength lies in Mars, when the average would always be 10%, because there are 10 planets. The trine happens to be the strongest aspect in the horoscope. It's number 1, and it has a numerical value of 85, and it has a percentage value of 21%. And on the fact sheet, the mean aspect has 11%. That means it's twice as strong as the mean aspect in the horoscope. Jupiter is the number 7 planet, and it has a numerical value of 79, and it has only 8% of planetary influence, which means that Mars is almost 3 times as strong as Jupiter is. Last time when we looked at the Saturn-Mercury trine in the Jay Gould chart, things were more symmetric there because the planets were more equal. In this case, this is the strongest aspect in the chart. It's not overwhelmingly stronger than the second aspect. What is the second aspect here? The second aspect is only 3% away. It's the Sun sextile Uranus. Yeah. So it's strong, but it isn't overwhelming. What this means is that the tool or the talent or the capability is well developed and very likely to be used. This trine represents her first choice in interacting with the world, especially because it involves the ascendant. It's her first choice. It's a reliable talent, and it's well sharpened. And of all of the talents that she has, it's the one that's least likely to err. It's a trine. This means that in using this tool or using this talent, she's likely to try to find the easiest and the simplest way of doing things. It also means that she's most likely, it's a benign or benefic aspect, she's most likely to use it to the good. It also means that the experience of using it is likely to be pleasant, pleasantly uncomplicated. Since the trine is the figure that represents in all symbology universally, it represents the manifest active spirit. That means its perfection is sort of unworldly, and it has a spiritual otherness about it. Now, when we turn our attention to looking at the planets, and not just the trine itself, if we don't name them, we find something very unusual. Just looking at the planets as planets without them being specific planets. One planet is very much stronger than the other. In my opinion, I think that perfection and even strength usually is best developed when there is balance. So this aspect is something of an anomaly to be brought to a high state of perfection with that much imbalance between the two participants. So it's an anomaly that we have to try to understand. Something unexplained, or something unusual that is unexplained.
I'm not saying it's now about the balance, it's later in
I don't believe that somebody can talk as fast as you all the time.
This is deep and it's to you. I didn't know what it meant, but thanks.
All right, it almost seems like the perfection is caused by imbalance. That the perfection is caused by stressing one thing over the other. If we look at that, this is another statement of extremism. And it's a statement that this is a perfected extremism. So we find another redundancy running through the personality. The talent is accomplished by doing one thing more than the other and doing a lot more of it. With Mars-Jupiter aspects, we have to deal with pride, respect, honor, daring, big-spiritedness. This is actually the athlete's aspect. Years ago, in the early days when I was first learning astrology, I found out that it's also the planets that are involved with billiards and bowling, impact and pride. A couple of years ago in the Shakespeare class, we looked at Mark Antony as being a Mars-Jupiter person in the play Antony and Cleopatra. He was perfect for it. He did everything in a grand style, in a big way. When he fell in love, when he debauched, or when he was a general, he did it in a big way. He was generous to a fault, and gave everything to his own men. Extremely Jupiterian. On the other hand, he was very direct. He was very forceful. And he was brave enough to drink horse piss when he had to, when there was no water around. All of these things are martial. This is a man's man. So, in looking at a character like that, you get something of the sense of what is involved in a strong Mars-Jupiter aspect. Now, this is not our case, but when Jupiter is stronger, the principle is the source of the pride. Because a person has faith in the principle, that's where their strength comes, that's where their pride comes. The idea is the all, and the action is just the carrying out. And when Jupiter is stronger, there's a lot of bravado, a lot of fanfare, a lot of hype, and above all, a lot of bombast. If we take the case, which is also not our case, where the two are balanced, the relationship between idea and application goes point for point. The understanding that is derived from their closeness, one doesn't act beyond the principle, and one doesn't extend the principle beyond the action or beyond the practice. So it's a kind of pride that isn't puffy and it isn't pushy. Now let's look at our case. In our case, Mars is much stronger than Jupiter. And that is the signature of a zealous enthusiast. Someone who is impassioned by life. There's principle and philosophy that come from Jupiter, but just enough to light what becomes a very raging fire. In all religions, including and especially Christianity, there have always been struggles between those who believe in a life of faith versus those who believe in a life of works. This is a character that definitely comes down on the side of works. So we see another indication that the ninth house Mars with this aspect represents a religion or a philosophy that is based on works, that is based on deeds. So the perfection that we looked at just a few minutes ago with the trine is a perfection that is done or accomplished by a whole lot of works. There's something circular in it, as often happens with trines. Positivity sparks action, the positivity being Jupiterian. Active work produces perfection. Perfection allows for more energy available. And then the whole cycle starts all over. Action is positive, ruled by Mars. Optimism is positive, ruled by Jupiter. So they're both extremely positive, despite the sometimes dark Scorpio ascendant, and despite the anti-quality of the Pluto opposite the ascendant. So basically this is, when we take it in proportion, a very positive personality. This tells us how the regeneration is accomplished. It's not accomplished by feeling or anything like that. It's accomplished by work. This is enthusiastic work. At one stage it produced a self-sufficient isolation that needed humbling, individualism, even though her zealous application of energy approached the degree of cruelty, even though she was fiercely dominant, she was positive. So we can see why in that positivity it resulted in the life that she had as Helen Keller. As long as she could do anything, even when she was severely limited and handicapped, she was positive. When she couldn't do anything, she would just get furious and she would flail around. But as long as she could do something, she was positive. It didn't take a whole lot of philosophy to get her fires burning and keep her optimistic. She believed that as long as she could work and do something, any situation could be overcome. She even wanted to go to work and take a job. Quite something. She was right. She worked at things, and she accomplished. Amazing as it may seem, she even learned how to speak. It was a kind of a strange sounding speech that she had, but she learned how to do it. It doesn't make any difference that she was humbled into having to work on regenerative activities. And that didn't weaken her pride, it strengthened it. It made her happy to do what she was doing. Now all of this reflects into the personality in other ways. There is that rare fixed sign sextile of Mercury Pluto. You don't often find fixed sign squares where both planets are fixed. Once she set her mind on something, she was absolute. She never gave up until she had an understanding of it, and an understanding that was in her own terms. This aspect and the ninth house positioning also reinforced dogmatism in philosophy and in personality. And the positioning between the seventh and the ninth house indicate that there may have been some kind of absolute, harsh, or severe judgment. fair but absolute that come into play. So the thesis, or trying to picture it, not saying that she was, but trying to picture it as a wicked bishop, is real. But it was all in good faith. It's again a fiery sign, Mercury, and it was positive even when it was cruel. So this is a die-hard kind of positivity. And it's not only the personality, it permeates into other parts of the character. It was not just saying, I can do, it was just doing. There wasn't any braggartry. She actually didn't have to brag. Everybody else bragged for her. Now, if you note the way that we've been looking at this chart, we've been speaking about it in terms of the past. Nothing is said. We haven't said anything about the future, and we've said very, very little about the present. And stating it this way has been intentional. What happens is when I focus on this kind of a personality, there is a sense that there are things that are lingering and that are ripe and that they have to be cleared up and gotten out of the way before other things in the present or the future can be started. So to some extent, this horoscope is like, or this life is like clearing away the rubble from an old house before you build a new one. Sometimes there are rebirths that are like that. They're like that, what's 1,000 years? One rebirth doesn't make any difference. If you have to get these things out of the way, you get them out of the way. This feeling doesn't permeate the entire character, but it certainly permeates the personality. And it indicates a ripeness that is almost fatal in its inevitability. And that's precisely what you expect when you have destiny that is associated as much with the fixed signs in the personality. All right, now that we've gone through our correction, we're ready to try to answer the other part of the original question. We have not addressed the issue of deafness. Hearing and seeing are very different from each other. Very advanced mystics who can look deep into our evolutionary past say that the seeds for hearing and seeing were planted at very different times, and that hearing came before seeing. Even in our current evolutionary times, the two are very different. The medium for sound is physical stuff. The medium for light is energy. Very different. They both travel by waves, but the waves are very different. Light waves travel in inverse waves. They go up and down. Sound waves are called longitudinal waves. They go forward and back. There isn't an up and down sound waves. As a consequence, the senses that are developed for them are very different. As we said earlier, with sight, we have a great command of the field of vision, and we rely on it. Because they have vision, because they have their own language, many of modern deaf people do not feel they are handicapped. The only reason they accept a handicap is because they get disability compensation. I've had friends that have worked with the School for the Blind and gone to the Blind Society. They just absolutely will not believe that they are handicapped.
The blind or the deaf?
What?
The blind or the deaf?
The deaf. With hearing, there is more accuracy and much less illusion than there is with sight. Auditory people are different people than visual people. Auditory people are usually more thought-oriented. Ocular people are much more emotion and action-oriented. So following along the recognition of these differences, the spiritual causes and the astrological signatures for deafness are very different from those from blindness. Weak vision or aberrant vision is different than blindness. You find that in a horoscope. Blindness is not just a matter of degree. Sometimes it is, but not usually. Being hard of hearing is different than deafness. It's not just a matter of degree. Some argue that there's a lot of deafness due to mechanical causes. And that's where the deafness comes from. In our time, that's very much true. It's shallow, but there are a lot of cases of people who are deaf, working around machines, working around rock music, things like that. In those cases, being hard of hearing or having weakened hearing is a consequence of inattentiveness or carelessness. That is, yes. One is careless about not putting on ear coverings.
I heard deafness is consciousness, not wisdom.
We're coming to that.
You know what? I'm kind of blank that'll look. So I understand.
Okay. It's not the only cause, but in our times a lot of sound being weakened in terms of hearing, inattentiveness or carelessness is present. Now the folk belief is that diminution of hearing is due to deliberate, selective inattention. That is, people lose the ability to hear because they choose to not listen. Like much folklore, there is a grain of truth to it. One encounters it frequently. When it does occur, it is often when Mercury is in a fixed sign, a very stubborn fixed sign. I don't have to listen to you, and I've got the will to not listen to you. Sometimes inattentiveness is due to interest in something else. So in the history of astrology, by very good astrologers through the ages, the classical astrological signature for deafness is Mercury in a watery sign, especially in the 4th, 8th, or 12th houses, which are sometimes called handicapped houses. Water signs are sometimes called mute signs for this very reason. As far as I can tell, this does work out. And what it seems to me is that the emotions, which are ruled by water, are allowed to carry away the mind, which is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is not at home in watery signs, or it isn't at home with emotions. We're assuming that Mercury rules both the mind and sense perception. So what happens is, the mind gets carried away, and a person loses sensory perception due to excitement. It doesn't take very long. If you go to the School for the Blind Doesn't take very long to find out that you find in very high numbers people who are extremely excitable among the blind. So what astrologers have said over the ages holds true, but it doesn't quite hold true for this horoscope. There are planets that are in watery signs, and they are in handicapped houses, but they're not related to hearing. So we have to look to a different classic.
Excuse me, did you say people in blind schools are excitable? Or
Yep. I don't want to say blind, deaf.
schools.
I said blind schools, but I meant deaf. I'm sorry.
Okay, because, I was not
If you go over
understanding.
here to Delavan at the School for the Deaf, or
You
if
said the
you,
opposite.
yeah,
right.
I'm very sorry.
No, that's
Very sorry. So we look to another astrological classic for deafness, which does apply, and that is a Mercury-Saturn affliction. And this is another rare affliction. First, it's a fiery sign square. Both planets are in fiery signs, and for a square, they're 5 houses apart. You don't find something like that very often. The square can indicate neural blocking, but in this case, we know that isn't true. It is the destructive quality of Saturn that is present here, and not the blocking quality of Saturn in the square. No, that's not listed in the fact sheet. Well, I'll tell you in just a few minutes why it's not listed in the fact sheet. Because there are some important points I want to make. I want to be able to poke my finger into my palm when I make points. It is, as with the blindness, the deafness is a matter of the destruction of a sensory nerve. It's not due to the weakness in the organ, or it's not due to the debilitation of the mind. It's not, in this case, inattention or distraction. It is outright blocking or ignoring in the mind. The presence of Saturn in this combination could indicate fear, but Saturn is so weak in this chart, and there's so much courageous Mars, that it isn't a matter that she didn't listen because she was afraid. What is most likely is that this is just plain old closed-mindedness with Saturn, or narrow-mindedness with Saturn. Now that's very different than prejudice and intolerance, but often closed-mindedness goes along with prejudice and intolerance. Again, this is from the 9th house. So again, religion is probably likely to be involved in the cause. One can imagine a card, for example, being unwilling to hear specific appeals, doing so with a harsh, fiery attitude. Now, to Roz's question, classic does not enter into the personality factors. But not everything in astrology is neat and tidy, and it doesn't always fit into a system as we would like it to. It all works together no matter what. It's clear that the fiery sign nature is involved because it was, again, the burning of nervous tissue was how it was brought about. Now, Mercury is often considered a catalyst. And we know a catalyst brings about an astrological, a chemical reaction, but it never enters into the reaction. So Mercury could very well enter into the personality and produce a reaction without itself necessarily being in the personality as a primary factor. All right. See, it's like going through all of this. All you guys are so intuitive It's like you're with me. I put hours and hours and hours into putting this together. All right. We've already spoken about humbling being brought about by the extreme double disability. It seems like there's something analogous going on in another way. When the primary and dominant ruler of the ascendant is in the 9th house, an inordinate amount of religious or philosophical outlook is dependent on the external world. This is more than just deeds or actions in the external world. What she sees or what she saw in the external world influenced her religion. Now, we don't all have enough time to discuss the interactions with the external world as we did with Jay Gould. We're going to say a few things nonetheless, and we're going to be dangerously brief about it. Some of what she sees and does in the external world might be saving the appearances in terms of apparent right actions. And that may be why she has a narrow mind about what is appropriate behavior or right deeds or right actions. We're not implying that she's a hypocrite. She's way too blunt and way too direct for that. But that does not preclude her enforcing a view of the world based on narrow actions. Now, because there's so much Mars, there's not a good deal of sophistication. In the personality, she might even be seen as simplistic or primitive. In fact, in her life, she didn't have a good deal of outward subtlety. She was not without taste, but she didn't have a good deal of subtlety. With the extremism...
Somebody has dressed so they're doing a pretty good job.
What?
Let's look at the picture. Someone's dressed so they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, you would notice that, wouldn't you?
I noticed my aesthetic.
With the extremism that she had in the Mars extremism, that's not pro-evolutionary in someone spiritual or someone religious. So it looks like with the double disability, she is forcing a closing off of her flow so that she can develop more subtle inner faculties.
Well, where did you get that she's narrow? How did you get that?
What?
How did you get the narrowness? Where did you pick up the narrowness?
Mercury square Saturn. Narrow-minded.
Oh.
So she appears to shut herself off from the external world. Everybody's getting tired, and we've got another. Yeah. What we're saying is that the extremity burned out the senses and closed her off from the external worlds because in her small view of things and her thinking only certain actions were right and doing things by force, that is not truly spiritual. And so by carrying things out to its extreme, she shut off the external world so that now she's turned inward so that she can develop the spiritual things that she's earned the right to. She's done all this service. By their deeds, she's earned the right. Now you want to say something?
You know what? It came in my head. So I thought, I'm blind. She has to have a narrow world. She has to count her steps to go somewhere, and you have to almost do the same thing every day, because you know what I mean?
Yep.
Because if you don't, your world is messed up.
That's a good example of the way it works in this life, but we're trying to see how she got to this place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's all right. I don't want to be critical because that's a very excellent insight.
I thought it was good. Thank you very much.
All right. Now this doesn't invalidate all the other things that we speculated on about the personality. It just shows that there are more sides to it. Looking at it this way, she's earned the right by carrying out simple things and doing so with enthusiasm. If we want to grow spiritually, we do that by extreme efforts. When we do that, we call up extreme resistances and extreme challenges. That's what rapid growth is all about. And that's what she's done. Now, at this point, we can quit. But I've got another page of notes. It's on something very arcane, something very esoteric. It's pretty, but it's very arcane, and you may or may not want to go on for it. Who wants to go on?
My wife didn't skip it. 9:30, so I'm going to go at 9:30.
All right. Well, go ahead.
I arrived in time. You don't have to take it home.
We want to talk about cosmological things. And in cosmological things, the principle of analogy is operative throughout all cosmogony and all cosmology. As above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. It's like saying the atom is shaped like the solar system is shaped like the nebula. That's a very crude form of the principle of analogy, but it works through everything. Let's take one example and see what it leads to in her consciousness. Let's look at the phenomenal human being. Not the spiritual, but the phenomenal. As phenomenal human beings, we have a dense physical body. And it's composed of the solids, liquids, and gases of this dense physical earth. But this dense, solid physical body is interpenetrated, and it's surrounded by a life-giving vital body, which is composed of the four ethers that are the higher part of the physical world. We have something live in us. We have a vehicle of life just as much as we have a vehicle of stuff and form. That vital body is interpenetrated, and it's surrounded by an auric desire body, which some call an astral body. It's composed of desire material, and its purpose is to motivate the energy to move the physical body. And the body is beginning to be interpenetrated and surrounded by a mind composed of mind stuff. The ethers and the physical body are all of this realm. The desire world is a realm that has its own laws, and the world of thought is a realm that has its own laws. Now what we're going to say is we're going to say this in terms of symbols. When we deal with symbols, it's all very indirect. And symbols can be interpreted many ways. And the way we're going to interpret them is just going to be one way. In the course of the whole study, we're going to interpret a lot of symbols in a lot of other ways. They're not contradictory, they're just different. Again, if we're looking for a real neat and tidy world, it isn't this one. We can relate the dense physical body to the element earth. It's the dense stuff and form. We can relate the vital body to the element water, because life works its way into form through water. Nothing can live without water. We can relate the desire body to the element air, the air that moves the water. And in this analogy, as we're looking at it, we can relate the concrete mind to the element fire. It is the bearer of spiritual light and spiritual fire. Now, the dense world is for us completely outward. We take a dense object and cut it open. All we see is a new outside. The desire world and all the worlds within, all the higher spiritual worlds, are primarily inward. The outward part of them is often illusory. You have to know the inward part to know them. But the ethers in the etheric body are both inward and outward. And that is why they are polar. They have one pole that relates to the inner worlds and one pole that relates to the outer worlds. Because they have this polarity between the within and the without, they are what is responsible for conveying things from the without to the within and from the within to the without. So the ethers in many schools of esotericism are seen primarily as a medium of transport. But they are related to what they transport. And hence they are symbolically analogous to the greater realms and the greater bodies. Thus the chemical ether, which does all of the work with physical form, is related to earth. The life ether, which brings vitality into the vital body and vitality in its function, is related to water. The reflecting ether, which even looks like a blue flame, relates to thought and to fire. But the light ether relates to desire and air. So like the other ethers, it too has two poles and two functions. The negative pole of the light ether is responsible for coloration. Everything that's colored in this world is colored as a consequence of deposits from the light ether. Colors themselves are found in the desire world. They're brought into this world through the light ether. The positive pole of the light ether works with heating the body and with sense perception. In this horoscope, there are no planets in air. This doesn't mean that she doesn't have any light ether. That would be absurd. In this horoscope, there is a great deprivation, but it doesn't mean that all people who have no planets in air are going to be similarly deprived. It just means that she's using the astrological forces in this way. We're looking only at this horoscope and at this individual. So when we look at this individual, or at least when I do, I get the feeling that for some higher inner purpose, the general sense perception as it relates to the ethers is being held temporarily dormant. This also looks like a burnout in another way because of too much fire. It's too much fire that has burned up all of the air available, causing a personal suffocation. That is another picture into the character. However, groping in the dark, she learns to perceive in another way, to feel and to touch. It's almost as if she's trying to spiritualize the experience of the material world in direct feeling. This fact is supported, this speculation is supported, that by the fact that if we look at the earthy signs, all of the planets of earthy signs are octave planets, and there are only octave planets in earthy signs. So it indicates that the spirituality is being directly put into the field, and the spiritualization, the densest part of the body, and everything else is being held in abeyance for that. Now we didn't do maybe 40% of personality, but I'm not going their own. And next time we'll work on the personality of Mohan Gandhi. And that's cool. Yes.
You made one statement about something to the effect that she was right for this and she was right for that. Okay. And then the other thing, the narrowness of thought or narrowness of mind and so on and so forth. Now, if I recall correctly, did you not say something that was right and something that had to be taken care of was an intercepted sign?
No, that's something that's too much available. The opportunities for bringing things to rightness are often brought about by the 4th, 8th, and 12th houses. But that's not what I've been talking about. I've been talking about the signs, and I guess I should have been more clear about this. Good that you bring this up. There are 3 kinds of destiny. There is immediate destiny, there's hypothetical destiny, and there's right destiny. Immediate destiny is cause, results, and consequence right in the moment. You step on the rake, you pop in the head immediately. But suppose you bop a lot of other people, and there isn't a chance to make it up to them. There isn't a way to make restitution. In their next life, you get hypothetical service destiny. This is always Heidi like this. There's always one life. But usually the cardinal sign destiny, which is pay as you go, you step on the rake, you pop. If you do things that you can't reap all of the consequences of, then you get common sign destiny. And in common sign destiny, you can make it up to the other person by service, or by education, or by some other vicarious means. You bring to them what they need, or what you deprived them of in the past. The problem with common sign destiny is that it's easy to postpone it. So there's plenty of time. I can always do this. I really don't have to serve this way.
So what's kind of the common sign?
Whether the planet involved is in one of the common signs, the mutable sign.
Oh, mutable.
Yeah, all right. I use a different term. That's sorry. So what happens is if you don't take care of it in mutable signs, then it becomes right destiny or fixed destiny. Something that now you've got to learn. You've got to learn it by experience, and you can't get away from it. And what we've been talking all along, I should have said this earlier, that would have been a good interruption. But if you look back at what we said that the strong fixed sign character of everything has to do with personality, the Scorpio rising being fixed, and the real having the ruler of the ascendant in it, and the ruler of the ascendant is so strong, means that there is something very right, something very escaped.
It's also, I see it as just a thought. I see it as also very limited, and that boundaries have been set because it doesn't have its own house. Leo doesn't have its own house.
Yeah, but it's
Or does that? Is that
I don't want to go into that now.
Okay.
I can talk to things like that, but I don't want to, because in all of this, I've been trying very carefully to build this into the world, and to just throw something out offhand would be to make a statement that didn't fit into the world. And I don't want to do that.
I relate to this thing. You don't have to do it. You have to do this thing. How long it takes you got to do it. But what's hypothetical?
The immutable. Hypothetical or service or vicarious.
Okay, hypothetical. And the immediate is?
Cardinal destiny. Pay as you go.
Okay.
Do now, go now, pay now.
Okay, and the fixed sign, you call that what kind of destiny?
Right.
Right.
Inevitable destiny.
I do relate. I have that. I have inevitable. I understand. I relate to my destiny. I relate to what you're saying about what I know about my destiny. Inevitable.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes. Stiff neck, yes. Yes. That's associated with Taurus.
Yeah.
And Pluto in Taurus, it would be a good signature of a stiff neck person. Stiff neck person resisting, yes. Yes. Anyone else have a question? We'll talk about that when we come to the spirituality and individuality. That'll be only 3 years. 3 years from now. Well, I don't. I'm about 10 days away from being 65 years old. I don't have many years left. I don't want to screw around. I want to do a good job of things, and I want to, I want to show what you can do with astrology. I want to be thorough about it. I want to relate it to the world. And I don't want to just flip it out there. Hey, let's run on to the next horoscope.
Is that number your own philosophy? I mean,
I'm putting in much more every year. You've been through this before, and you can see this is much more thorough.
Yeah, the basic thing that I can't remember. When you were talking about the various levels, you said the body and how it's associated with the earth signs and water is associated with vitality. Did you say sense impressions with air? And what did you say with fire?
Is motive driving from spirit. Desire, yeah, there's a difference between desire and the commanding quality of spirit. Desire it has a more lurid, objective thing. The spirit just is universal, and it just has to be done. Well, yeah. This is the last part about the different going off on me, but I don't. Just a little divertimental.
I must have been thinking of your thoughts because when you started off, you were talking about someone for aspects. I was thinking of this music. I was thinking of
I was going to say it because of
Yeah.
But we must have been thinking of on
What was it?
on position. We were talking about the very hard.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.